Hey there, good morning everyone. Good morning. Day 79, spiritual healthcare. Good morning to everyone. It's good to be here today again. As I say, day 79. This is awesome. Of course, Friday, day before the weekend. I hope you guys are doing really well. It's a beautiful day here. It's gonna be super hot here actually, which is unusual. So it's like well, at least lately anyway, it seems to be temperatures up and down, but it's gonna be a beautiful day here. Good morning guys, good morning to everybody. Nice to see you all. Today I am like, I can't wait for this topic today because we talked a little bit about it yesterday, but we're gonna be talking about the Wendigo and the Rake today, and I'm stoked about this because it's two of my favorite topics. Good morning Kaz and Dan and Marge, nice to see you. Ed, yay, New Jersey in the house. Yeah, I love it. Welcome you guys, welcome. Morning Patricia. Good morning to all of you. It's good to see you guys. I am stoked today because this is one of my favorite topics. I think it's absolutely fascinating, and it lends into a good morning Nigel, nice to see you. Lends into a question that I got the other day, which I thought was so good. So we're gonna delve into, and say in the next little while, I think, delve into the world of cryptids and stuff like that, because they're fascinating, and there's such a unique interplay, I think, between, some people I guess confuse the world of cryptozoology with like paranormal, and it's kind of two different things, because with cryptozoology we're dealing with like animals and living things, and then with like the paranormal you're dealing with more of like the mind and the spiritual side of things. So, but I think there's an interesting crossover, and we're going to talk about that too. Good morning Laura and Sally, nice to see you. Good to see you, Laura. I hope you and Richard are doing awesome. I was thinking about you guys actually the other day, and I thought, man, we should all Skype or something. So it is good to see you guys, and so I'm stoked today because, as I say, Wendigo and Rake is such an interesting subject matter, and one of the questions that came in the other day was, where is it here? It was so good. What is the most bizarre paranormal concept that you are willing to entertain with the rational part of your brain? And the Wendigo it really came up in my head really quick, because it's something that I've had some really interesting ties with, which I'm going to talk about today, with a very good friend of mine who I'm hoping to have on Spiritual Healthcare one morning for you guys to talk with, because he is he's fascinating and has had some very interesting Wendigo encounters. Good morning Wes, good morning Des, nice to see you guys. It seems to be the scroll thing with all the comments on the bottom. It seems to be working right now. So that's the last couple of days it hasn't been working at all. It's just like I've had to physically move it, but I don't know. It seems to be working, so I'm not going to touch it, because if I touch it, it's going to break probably. So, but that question, it got me thinking about things like the Wendigo. The one thing I wanted to briefly touch on this morning, though, I don't know if you guys heard about this in Arkansas, the crazy that is going on in Arkansas right now with the paranormal. So Coast to Coast has covered this along with a few others. Where I guess there was some sort of like late night ghost hunt or something like this, and this one guy ended up stabbed, and two other people ended up basically calling the police and accusing him of false imprisonment, and it was insane. Like it was crazy as hell. I always, I love Ayanla's expression that if you see crazy coming across the street, this seems to be one of those incidents. And it was just nuts. So apparently they got into this argument about who was driving who back to the hotel or something. And they get in the car, and then the guy who was driving back to the hotel basically he wouldn't pull over when one of the other members was having trouble breathing, and both of the two members, I guess, attacked this guy and then ended up stabbing him in the leg. Like, it was just like crazy as hell is what it was. So it was just nuts. So anyway, the driver was arrested for first degree battery and false imprisonment, and but they don't know, like, they don't know what basically happened after that. There's like no details about anything else. But let me tell you, like, yeah, like when you get into a lot of these sort of I guess these groups that go out like looking for paranormal activity and stuff, you really do have to be careful with some of these people, because you've got there's a lot of instability in the paranormal, like, investigation field on that level. Like, until you sort of pull yourself from that level and get back to sort of the academic side of it, there you can run into a lot of like just very emotionally unstable individuals, and it's something to really be careful of and watch out for. I know I had that happen on a number of occasions with people that I've dealt with, even event coordinators that were in regards to like paranormal events and stuff like that. You have to be really careful. I had an incident a number of years back where I was supposed to be speaking at a convention, and the convention, the lady that was organizing the convention, like, just she basically had like this psychotic break, and I had to leave the convention. And, all the headliners, basically, once they saw me pull out of it, all the headliners did as well, because they realized something was up. And then, but as people were discussing it with each other later, like a month down the road, it turned out everybody had a story about what was going on with this organizer. Like, it was really crazy. So yeah, there seems to be, like, there's a lot of that kind of instability, within sort of that level of the paranormal field. So we have to be careful. Des is saying, really know your team before going out with people. Yeah, like, that is so true, because let me tell you, like, I mean, even with, any time that I'm pulling somebody or contracting somebody to come out and do one of the investigations or job with me or whatever, it's like they have, man, like, I not only are they grilled hardcore, but I've usually, they've got an established reputation around what they do. Like, they're, whether they're an electrician or whether they're a psychologist or whether they're, whatever their job is. Yeah, it's something I'm super conscious of. So you can't just be your buddies. Like, this is one of the reasons why, I think, you see a lot of these groups where it's like, oh, we're just a group of friends and we're going to just go out and do this for a lark. And it's like, you can't really do that. You've got to have, you have to bring on the people that have a job. Like, why are they there? Are they a plumber, for instance, that can check the piping, or an architect? I worked with one engineer and one architect, years ago. Stephanie was architectural technologist. And it was like, so I mean, the two of us were best friends and we're extremely close, but there was a reason that she was there, apart from being a co-founder of EntitySeeker. She brought something to the table. So there was always a reason behind it. So anyway, yeah, like, crazy as hell. People stabbing other people, like, it just, like, good Lord. So anyway, that's on Coast to Coast AM if you guys want to read that little article. Just nuts. So anyway, I wanted to get into, as I say, what I find some of the most interesting concepts and cases, in at least on the North American continent, which is the Wendigo and the Rake. And it's to me, it's a fascinating phenomenon. They blend into each other a little bit, as they kind of do with the skinwalker phenomenon. There's kind of this overlap in some of the cultures. And it's really, really interesting. So there's lots of controversy around the Rake. I'll start with that, because the Rake it was kind of labeled like a Slender Man thing for a while, but it came out long before the Slender Man ever showed up. And people have wondered, is this real? Is this something that's being completely hoaxed and made up on the internet, kind of thing? Because there was a lot of false stories that came out about the Rake and whatnot. So for those of you who have not heard about what the Rake is, it's basically like this long-armed, gangly, humanoid type entity with these really long clawed fingers, which is where it gets its name, the Rake. And the people who have said to have seen it are, like, often almost stalked by it. Like, it follows them and they can't seem to get it to leave them alone. So some of the first cases came out of, or alleged first cases came out of New York State. But after, like, years of research, it's said that, people have discovered stories as far back as the 12th century, all the way up into present day, covering about 4 continents. Like, it's pretty widespread. And what the Rake is said to be able to do is sort of a cross between sort of this non-physical thing and this physical thing, because it's said to be able to inflict damage. Like, if it gets upset or something like that and it claws you, then you're bleeding, and, like, it's actual, like, being. So 1964, it was allegedly said that there were suicide notes that were found that basically blamed the rake. The guy said in the suicide note that he just couldn't keep going. Every time he woke up, this thing was somewhere in the space with him. He was terrified, and he ended up killing himself. But he also had a side note. When they found his suicide note, they found a box of other notes. And in there as well, there was another letter, a loose letter that was written to a friend or something like that, that basically said that the rake spoke his friend's name, and that that he was going to pray for them because he didn't know what was going to happen. There was another letter that was apparently found or discovered from Spain. That basically said, "I've experienced the greatest terror," and it said that over and over and over and over again, and then basically described the rake, and they don't know what went on with that person either, apparent suicide or something like that. And then in 1691, it was said that there was a mariner's log that described the same creature. Basically, the guy was begging to go back to England, and it was because the rake didn't want them, in this space or territory or whatever. He was begging to go back to England. So it was really interesting. And so anyway, there's allegations that this is all completely a hoax. It's an internet hoax, that's it. And nothing more should be said about it. But, however, there are people that have come forward over and over and over again that have said that no, there's something to this. It's, this is based in reality, and the hoax part of it has kind of been drawn off of fact and legend. And what I find very interesting about the rake, so this is the crossover for me with the rake and the Wendigo, is that there are elements of the rake that are very much founded in the stories and descriptions of the creature of the Wendigo, which is said to be more of an entity, not as much of a physical being, but more of an entity. And the Wendigo began in the Algonquin culture, and has spread in and amongst the Métis and the Cree and the Blackfoot and all of the different First Nations people. And it's usually not spoken about in the winter at all. Like, you are not allowed to mention the name, nothing. Like, just if you put energy into it, you will attract it, so you don't do that. So in that culture especially, if you go to an elder or something like that, and you ask to speak about something like this, they will turn around and tell you, you can't talk about this in the winter, you've got to wait till the spring. So, here's the reason why. So the Wendigo is such a fascinating story and phenomenon, and I am personally a believer in Wendigo on some level, because I've had some very interesting ties to this, and I live very close to where one of the original cases, and probably one of the most famous cases of Wendigo, actually happened, which took place in St. Albert, which is like half an hour from my house. It's very close. And we had a Wendigo possession case, which happened at a hospital right here in Edmonton, which is about 15 minutes from me. So very interesting tie-ins with this entity. And so lots going on specifically in Alberta. And it's been really interesting. So on the East Coast, the description of the Wendigo is quite different than on the West Coast. So when we look at the East Coast, the Wendigo typically looks a little bit like the rake. We've got this humanoid figure, we've got these long arms with these sort of clawed hands, like almost faceless in a way, but you've got these parallels with the rake, again coming in at night, stalking people in their house and this kind of thing. And it comes off very much that, if the people who are talking about the rake and things like that are telling the truth, it's interesting that there is such a correlation and just the name really has shifted. But the phenomenon that they're experiencing is very similar. So when we go to the West Coast, when we go to Alberta and BC, specifically the prairies though, when we go there, we start to see descriptions anywhere from these very short, almost dwarf-like creatures with long, scraggly black hair and sort of these sort of monstrous kind of piggish faces, that are quite small, all the way to these long, gangly, wolf-like, almost werewolf-looking beings with these long faces, sort of like these beard-type things with long arms, you know, patches of missing fur, almost Muppet-like in a way, just very creepy and extremely big, very tall, very big. And what is said is that the Wendigo is basically, if you see it, if you encounter it, then a couple of things can happen. They describe it's either you end up almost like possessed by it in a way, where you start to see the people around you as game animals, and you start to hunt them. And usually, especially within, you know, the 1800s, 1900s, where there was a lot of famine and isolation in the winter, that seems to be where this thing comes in on. That frequency is famine and isolation and trauma. What they would say is that people would start seeing their family members as game animals and want to eat them. So all of the cases of the Wendigo are pretty grotesque. They're usually having to do with a family member eating other family members and things like that. Which brings us to the case of Swift Runner. So there were other cases in Alberta. There was a big case in Trout Lake. And just to give you guys an example as to how prevalent this is here, okay, is that during the Trout Lake incident, the fellow that described seeing the Wendigo and committing the crimes that he did, after he was killed, they buried him, and then they piled this great big heap of logs on top of the grave. And just so, like, this puts it in perspective, the logs are replaced all the time now. Like, to this day, the logs are replaced. It's still such a thing there. The graveyard still exists. The logs are still there, and those logs are changed over to make sure that they are replaced all the time. And that's like 2020. So that's how prevalent this is here. But so Swift Runner was interesting, and this is where the story for me really took a turn. So one of my investigators, who is one of my dearest friends, he's amazing. His name's Matt. You guys have probably seen him on some of the shows and whatnot, because he's been on a couple of times, and numerous times on Haunted Edmonton and stuff. So, but Matt had an experience when he was a child, where he developed this really strange condition where he was getting swelling in his face, this red rash on his hands and feet. He had a severe fever. And what was interesting was that what came with all of this was, and after they finally got him healed, the doctors didn't know what was wrong with him. They couldn't figure it out. And once he was getting better, he ended up starting to see this great big dog-like creature start to climb in his bedroom window at night. And he was little at this time. He was just a kid. And it terrified the hell out of him. He said it would come in his window and get in his face and sniff and hunt, and he said it was petrifying. And this went on for years and years. He had no idea what was going on. He didn't know how to tell his parents. He didn't, like, it was horrifying, but ruined his childhood. So this went on for the longest time, and it wasn't until later that what we found out was that he was very much connected within distance of not only the place where the Swift Runner Wendigo case had happened, in St. Albert. Like, he was walking distance to where Swift Runner had been attacked by the Wendigo, and also within a very short distance afterwards, when he moved to this abandoned hospital where they say that a Wendigo possession actually occurred and happened. And that was the 1960s, I believe, that went on. So both locations very close to where this phenomenon was going on, and very significant phenomenon. And one of the things that comes with the Wendigo possession is the rash on the hands and feet, the fever, and the swelling. It seems to be a consistent factor within the Wendigo's MO. So it was, really interesting. And of course, at the time, he didn't know this. His family didn't know this. It was not news anywhere. But the Swift Runner case was very interesting. And basically what had happened was that up north, there was a community near Legal, Alberta, and the First Nations people there had basically thrown Swift Runner out of their their settlement, because apparently he was an alcoholic. There was some issues with his behavior, and they said, look, man, you can't stay here. You gotta like beat it. Take your family, do whatever you're gonna do, but you can't stay here. So he took off and left, and with his family, and not long later, he ended up knocking on the door of this little mission in St. Albert called the Lacombe Mission. It was run by Father Lacombe at the time. And he knew Swift Runner very well, because Swift Runner was a trapper and he was a guide, so he was connected in with the European settlers at the time. So as he came in, he said, my family's dead, everybody died of starvation, I don't know what to do, can you please help me? And Father Lacombe and the rest of the fathers at the time said, yeah, absolutely, come on in. But what they noticed was that the guy was still huge. Like, his Swift Runner was huge. He was like 6'5", 6'6", and like 250 pounds. Like, this is a big dude. So he comes in, and they realize that like he doesn't look like he's starved. This is some pieces that aren't connecting here. And what they discovered later, after they ended up phoning the police, he spent the nights in the mission there, screaming and yelling that something was coming in the window. The Wendigo was coming in the window and trying to attack him and getting in his face. Basically, it was the same description that Matt talked about as a little kid. And when we realized that, we followed the story back to the Egg Lake area, and once the Northwest Mounted Police, who arrested Swift Runner, got to the Egg Lake area, he was said to have gone out on the ice and started howling like a wolf, like just howling and laughing. And what they discovered was the fact that his family had been killed and eaten by him. And he cannibalized the whole lot of them, and so it was really horrifying. It was a horrific discovery, and he ended up being the first legal hanging in Alberta. But he ended up, they took him back to the Fort Saskatchewan prison, and he basically was he stayed there for quite a number of days, and the guards. The damn thing was the guards actually liked him. The guards liked him, to the point where the guards could not be the ones to pull the lever to hang him. They couldn't do it. They needed to bring someone else in to do it. But during the time he stayed there, it was the same thing. He was reporting having this thing, come in the window and whatnot. So it was pretty crazy. But the Wendigo seems to come in these weird little episodes that people have. It doesn't seem to be like a running condition. It's like people are having these bizarre these episodes where this seems to have happened. So it's really interesting. And as I say, the correlation between encounters like the Rake and what people describe, and then you look at things like the Wendigo, and you have to start to wonder, is there, is there a crossover here, or what people seeing with something like the Rake, the modern day interpretation of what First Nations people have seen with Wendigo. It's really interesting. Usually one of the phenomena that gets tied into this is the skinwalker, but we're going to talk about them tomorrow, because it's kind of another. It's a sort of another subcategory of a similar phenomenon. But the Wendigo, what I find very fascinating about it is, as I say, I was the hospital that Matt lived very close to, which was abandoned, that seemed to have this possession case associated with it, was the same hospital I was born at. So that was very interesting. And my doctor, years ago, my first family doctor, and I had him for like 20 years, way back in the day, had told me, because of course he knew what I did for a living, had told me that he was one of the people that sat in on this exorcism. Of course, not mentioning the Wendigo at all, but we find out later that the one possession case that happened at this hospital was apparently related to the Wendigo. It was very interesting. So there's a bunch of tie-ins for me to this whole thing, which I find is really intriguing. But the phenomenon has been really really widespread through Alberta. I had a case recently that was out at this acreage here in the prairies, and the woman that was experiencing this stuff was describing this gigantic, long, lanky, like wolf-like thing that was climbing up on their roof and trying to get in their bedroom window. And she thought we were going to think she was nuts when she was describing this. And she's like, it seems to hang out in the woods because their acreage is surrounded by all of these woods. And the strange thing was it was a familiar story to hear. So yeah, it was so interesting, like really interesting stuff. So anyway, yeah, I highly recommend taking a look into it. I'm gonna leave you guys some articles on the EntitySeeker Facebook page, so you can go through them and check it out, and draw whatever conclusion you guys see fit, because that's what it's all about, right? But I'm also going to pass on. There was a show that used to be on, and I missed this show because it was really well done, called Monsters and Mysteries. And Monsters and Mysteries was a really good little show. It was an hour show, and they usually covered like a couple of different weird phenomenon, like the Rake and the Wendigo and stuff like that. And anyway, so I found 2 of the episodes, so I'm gonna post the links from Daily Motion to those, so you guys can find them as well, and check it out. And they talk about Swift Runner in the one case as well, so it's kind of neat. They botched the story a little bit, but they do okay. When Matt and I were trying to hunt down Swift Runner's information back when I was writing my book Teaching the Living, back when we were doing that, digging the information up was really hard. We found there was a lot of crossover, like tons of crossover between different reports. We were reading the journals of the jail guards and all sorts of things like that. And we had to really sort through like what was myth and what wasn't, and figure that out. It was pretty tricky. So, but I think we did it. I think we did a pretty good job. So yeah, chapter 7 in Teaching the Living is all about that story. It's bizarre. So yeah, I'm going to leave you guys with the links to that as well. And I got a bit of reading for us, which I think is just a good reminder for today as we move into the day. Yeah, it's a good start. But I think we have to pay attention to some of these what we consider legend or lore. And I think a lot of the lesson here with this stuff, because I mean, as I say, the accounts that have come down the line for me with things like the Wendigo have been incredibly credible, and I think we've got to pay attention, and when we've got especially with First Nations people and things like that, I think we have to take it very seriously, and take it into consideration, because I never in my life would I have thought this was something that I was going to be I guess supporter is the wrong word, but a believer in. But the more I've researched and looked at it, and the more I've talked about the people and heard from the people that have experienced things like Wendigo, it becomes very hard to ignore. Very, very hard. So yeah, and Darren's bringing up, and Kaz is bringing up the chupacabra. Yeah, that's something that we got to chat about chupacabra at some point here, because that's a whole other ballgame. And that weird animal that they've actually now found and discovered, which is kind of neat too. That's like they stuffed them. It's crazy. But really interesting. Another Wendigo resource actually for you guys. I should mention this. My Chad Lewis, the cryptozoologist, Chad Lewis, awesome guy. He just came out with a book on Wendigo. He spent like 20 years of his career on Wendigo. That's it. So like that's what that's what he's done. It's amazing. And he just put his book out. So check that out as well. It's called Wendigo Lore, I think, by Chad Lewis. It's awesome. Awesome. All right, so I wanted to read you guys a little bit from Faith in the Valley this morning, because we got to get off on our day on the right foot. So check this out. Even on the spiritual path, things are not always going to be rosy. There will be difficult situations and people, bad days and hard times along the way. You have moments, days, and sometimes weeks when you will doubt yourself, and there will be times when you doubt the power of spirit. You may get sick. You may feel inadequate. You might lose things or people you hold dear. Just know, it's all a part of the process. For some reason, we think that spirit will miraculously change everything for the better. Eventually it may. However, the search for spirit, the quest for truth, the desire for peace usually rips the foundation of our lives apart. There are thoughts, feelings, habits, and conditions we have embraced which are grounded in fear, anger, judgment, and ego. The farther we move along the path toward a more spiritual life, the more we must be willing to release. Our trying times and major challenges are a process of that release. And I think we see it. We see it in these cases as well. We see it in these cases as well. When we look at things like that. When we look at these, there are stories within this, these tales of things like the Wendigo. There's a relationship between, what we are, how we are in the world, and what these things are teaching us as we move forward. When we look at things like the Wendigo, which seems to come out in times of isolation and famine and desperation and depression, and we look at what we can learn from that. And the concept, what I find one of the most interesting things about the concept of the Wendigo is that what it damages is not necessarily it doesn't always have to be about the horrors of the cannibalism and this kind of thing, because that really takes our attention off of everything else because it's so horrific. But what's interesting to me about the Wendigo is that the terror of it is the disruption of home and trust. That's what makes the Wendigo so frightening. It's the disruption of home and the disruption of trust. And that is the frightening thing about it, because not only does it make you paranoid, it makes you question not only yourself, your intentions, and the intentions of the people around you. And that's the destructive power of the Wendigo. Of course, the rest is just, it's terrifying and horrifying and horrific and all of these things. But the destructive power of the Wendigo is so much deeper than that. So we'll talk about that tomorrow, as well as say skinwalkers and things like that, because there's a tie in there also. Laura's saying that the talks are so much better than 10 a.m. work meetings. Thank you. They're 100 times more intellectually nourishing. Thank you, Laura, for saying that. I so appreciate that. I agree. I completely agree with you, by the way. So everybody, let's do our peace affirmations before we take off for the day. So everybody, take a breath. I'm a channel of peace and well-being, and my need for peace is abundantly met. I unconditionally accept, love, and appreciate myself and who I am. I recognize I am grateful for the abundance that is constantly flowing into my life, which I can choose to allow or not. I feel with every breath a sense of peace and love. I help others by maintaining and tending to my connection with Source as much as possible. This well-being is accessible to me, even in a sea of uncertainty. And at this moment, all is well. I am able to liberate myself from my past and live with peace and serenity. I can see and appreciate all the beauty and abundance of the life around me. I am able to embrace love while letting go of fear. And I find peace with the soothing silence of my inner being. And everybody take a breath. This was awesome. Awesome, you guys. Awesome. And I just realized it's actually Friday, so I am going to be taking the weekend off. But Monday morning, we are going to talk about Wendigo and the Skinwalkers and how that plays into all of this. So we'll be back Monday morning, guys. Monday morning, spiritual healthcare. Have an amazing weekend. Take this all in. I'm going to post a ton of links for you guys to check out over the weekend. And by Monday, man, we are gonna dig into some of the weirdest phenomenon. Let me tell you, some of the weirdest stuff that I've ever both I guess encountered and read about and heard about with the phenomenon of skinwalkers and stuff like that. So have an amazing weekend, you guys. We will be back on Monday, and I will see you all then. Have a wonderful day, guys, and yeah, enjoy. Bye.